What happens when Mel Gibson walks into The View and calls out Whoopi Goldberg to her face on live TV? No script, no filter, just raw truth, and the audience went wild. You do not want to miss what happened next. The moment Mel Gibson walked onto the set of The View, no one knew what was about to unfold. There was an energy shift, subtle at first, but powerful. The kind that makes even a distracted audience member stop mid-sip of their coffee. The kind that grips you before a single word is spoken. The studio lights glared just a little brighter as Mel stepped out from behind the curtain, dressed in a sharp black shirt that matched the intensity in his eyes. A salt and pepper beard framed his face, lending him the weathered look of a man who's seen storms and lived to talk about them. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't waving, he wasn't there for charm, he was on a mission. As he made his way across the stage toward the semicircle of hosts, the tension was undeniable. The clapping from the audience felt cautious, unsure, a blend of curiosity, surprise, and maybe even a little nervous excitement. Mel Gibson wasn't a typical View guest, and this wasn't going to be a typical segment. The co-hosts looked just as surprised as the audience. Joy Behar raised her eyebrows slightly. Sunny Hostin adjusted her notepad. And right at the center of it all, Whoopi Goldberg sat up straight in her chair, narrowing her eyes like a seasoned veteran preparing for battle. She knew this wasn't going to be a polite conversation about Hollywood or an easy promo for some upcoming film. Mel wasn't here to talk scripts or sound bites. He was here for something else. As he reached the table, Whoopi extended a hand, professionally, and Mel shook it firmly, maintaining direct eye contact. Then he took his seat, clipped on his mic, and gave a small nod to the camera. Calm, measured, like a soldier entering familiar terrain. The usual chit-chat never came. No light jokes, no pleasantries, no "how have you been" or "tell us about your latest project." Instead, a long pause filled the air. Then Whoopi broke the silence. "Well, Mel, it's been a while," she said, her tone a mixture of curiosity and warning. "A lot's changed since you were last in the spotlight." Mel leaned in slightly, never breaking eye contact. "Yeah," he replied evenly. "A lot's changed, and not all of it for the better." That was the spark. Murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in on the co-hosts' faces, picking up on every raised eyebrow and tightened jaw. The studio, which usually echoed with laughter or passionate debate, now held its breath, because everyone, from the hosts to the crew to the viewers at home, could sense it. This wasn't just another segment. This was about to become a moment. Whoopi, never one to back down, adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "So tell us," she said. "What exactly are you here to say?" Mel didn't flinch. He took a deep breath and looked directly at the panel. "I'm here to talk about what's happening to open conversation, to people in this business, to the industry we all claim to care about." A hush swept through the room. Even the audience, trained to react on cue, stayed silent, not because they weren't interested, but because Mel's tone, firm and steady, demanded full attention. He continued, "I've made mistakes. Everyone knows that. I've been dragged through it. Rightfully so in some cases. But this industry, this platform, it used to be about redemption, growth, and second chances. Now, it's about who can shout the loudest, who can cancel fastest." Whoopi's face tightened. "So you're saying you're the victim now?" she asked. Mel shook his head. "Not just me. I'm saying this culture, this obsession with punishment, over progress. It's destroying real conversation. And it's turning shows like this one into something they were never meant to be. Ideological courtrooms." Another gasp from the crowd. It was bold. It was raw. And it was exactly what nobody expected. Whoopi folded her arms. Joy looked over as if weighing whether to step in. But Mel wasn't done. "I'm not here to play nice or win anyone over," he said. "I'm here because people are scared to speak. And when even you, a legend in your own right, start policing what can and can't be said, we lose something important. Something we used to protect, truth. You could hear a pin drop. This was no longer a celebrity interview. It was a standoff, not between enemies, but between two very different philosophies. One rooted in control, the other in freedom. One that asks for obedience, the other that demands honesty. And somehow Mel Gibson, the man many had written off years ago, was holding court on live television, refusing to flinch, refusing to fold. And the audience? They were glued to their seats, caught in a moment they'd never forget. It didn't take long for the conversation to take a sharp turn. No sooner had the dust from Mel Gibson's opening statement settled than the discussion swerved towards one of the most divisive issues in entertainment today: Hollywood's double standards and cancel culture. Whoopi Goldberg, never one to bite her tongue, leaned forward with that trademark intensity that had earned her respect and controversy over the years. Her voice sharpened with purpose as she looked Mel dead in the eyes and said, "Let's not pretend you weren't part of the problem. You said things that hurt a lot of people. You disappeared, then came back like nothing happened. Why should anyone listen to you now?" It was the kind of moment that draws a line in the sand. The air grew heavy. A few audience members shifted in their seats. The energy in the room became electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm cracks the sky, but Mel didn't blink. Not once. Instead, he inhaled slowly, met Whoopi's challenge head-on, and said something that stopped everyone cold. "Because unlike most people, I've been through the fire," he said quietly, but with undeniable force. "And I came out, with scars and lessons, not excuses." A gasp rippled through the studio. Mel leaned in, eyes locked on Whoopi, his voice now firmer. "You talk about cancel culture like it's some distant concept, but you sit at this table every day deciding who's acceptable and who's not. That's not justice. That's performance." The co-hosts froze. The audience fell completely, silent. Joy Behar's mouth hung open just slightly. Sonny Hostin blinked, clearly trying to process what had just been said. But it was Whoopi who felt the weight of those words most directly, not because she was being attacked, but because Mel had flipped the script. He wasn't dodging blame. He was confronting it, and everyone else's too. He continued, his tone unwavering. "I'm not here to deny my past. I've owned it, paid for it. But this industry, it forgives some and forgets others. You know that. We all do. We watch certain people get rehabbed overnight while others get blacklisted forever." Whoopi interjected. "That's not always fair, but actions have consequences." Mel nodded. "Absolutely. But when the consequences become selective, that's not accountability. That's power politics." Now the room started to shift. Audience members who were hesitant began to murmur in agreement. A few claps, then more. Until finally, the entire studio burst into spontaneous applause. It wasn't for Mel as a person. It was for the truth he had just thrown on the table. Raw, uncomfortable, and undeniably real. And in that moment, the conversation cracked wide open. Mel didn't stop there. He gestured toward the audience and said, "Look at these people. They're tired of the hypocrisy. One wrong tweet, career over. But if you've got the right connections, you get a documentary deal and a book tour. The rules change depending on who you are and how much they need you." He turned back to the co-hosts. "That's the double standard. That's why I came here. Not to clear my name. That happened years ago. I came to challenge the system you all help uphold." Whoopi straightened in her chair, visibly rattled but trying not to show it. "So what? You're the voice of the silenced now?" she said with a half-smirk. Mel shrugged. "Not the voice, just someone who's not afraid to speak. And maybe that's why people are listening, because they're tired of being afraid too." It was a rare moment where the usual fire of the View didn't explode into chaos. Instead, it simmered. The power dynamic had shifted. This wasn't just a segment anymore. It had turned into a reckoning, one that went far beyond the careers of Mel Gibson or Whoopi Goldberg. It was about Hollywood itself, its choices, its silences, its contradictions. And for once, the audience wasn't just watching, they were feeling it. The applause didn't come from loyalty to Mel. It came from exhaustion, from viewers sick of watching the same broken system pretend to be fair, while constantly changing the rules. By the end of that exchange, one thing was certain. Mel Gibson didn't just show up. He showed out. And no matter what anyone thought of him walking in, he left them all with something they couldn't ignore, a question that hit deeper than any scandal or soundbite. What if the system is more broken than the people it tries to cancel? Mel Gibson didn't hold back. After his powerful clapback, on cancel culture, Mel went deeper. He looked out at the studio audience, then right back at the co-hosts of The View. There was no hesitation in his voice, just raw, unfiltered honesty. He began by telling a story the public rarely hears. The fallout. The part where the cameras stop rolling and the invitations disappear. "I remember the silence," Mel said. "It was deafening." He described how, almost overnight, doors slammed shut. Directors he'd worked with for years stopped returning his calls. Projects he'd been lined up for quietly vanished. People who used to call him a genius acted like they'd never met him. He was radioactive, and yet he didn't try to spin it as unfair. He took full ownership. "I made mistakes," he said clearly. "Things I wish I could take back. But here's what most people don't see. I didn't run. I didn't cry. Victim, I owned it." The audience leaned in. "I spent years rebuilding, and not my image, my character. Off camera, no social media redemption arcs. No teary interviews, just work. Just real conversations. Just trying to be better." Then came a line that echoed through the studio. "Accountability isn't a hashtag," he said firmly. "It's what you do when no one's watching." You could hear a pin drop. Even Whoopi didn't interrupt. Not yet. Then Mel did something unexpected. Something that caught everyone, especially Whoopi, off guard. He gave her credit. "You, Whoopi," he said, nodding respectfully. "You've got one of the biggest voices in the industry. You've influenced generations. You have the power to shift culture." It almost seemed like a peace offering. For a brief moment, Whoopi softened. But then came the twist. "But sometimes," Mel continued, "the sword you swing cuts the wrong people." That line hit like a punch. Whoopi sat up straight, her jaw clenched slightly. You could tell she wasn't used to being called out like that, not on her own stage, and Mel wasn't done. He gestured toward the panel. "You guys say this show is about conversation, but let's be honest, a lot of times it's not. It's a trial. People come on here, and if what they say doesn't fit the narrative, it's off with their head." Now the room started to shift again. You could feel the tension between the co-hosts, but the audience, they were with Mel. First, a few scattered claps, then more, and then people stood up. The camera panned to rows of audience members nodding, applauding, some even cheering. It wasn't just support for Mel, it was a reaction to something deeper, a shared frustration. Mel looked around and added, "It's okay to ask hard questions, but when you bring people on here just to corner them or shame them, that's not a discussion. That's performance. That's theater." Whoopi finally found her footing again. "Are you saying we shouldn't hold people accountable?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Not at all," Mel replied calmly. "I'm saying if we're going to talk about redemption, we have to allow space for it. You can't say do better and then never let anyone move on, no matter what they fi. Doing that statement hit the nerve that many have felt for years, that the road to forgiveness in Hollywood is paved with double standards and media agendas. Mel sat back slightly, letting the moment breathe. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't shouting. He just looked relieved. Relieved to finally say the things no one else had dared say. Especially on that stage, in front of Whoopi Goldberg, the matriarch of mainstream commentary. Even Sonny Hostin, who had remained mostly quiet, nodded slightly, maybe not in full agreement, but in acknowledgement. Joy Behar shifted in her seat uncomfortably. No one quite knew how to respond, because Mel had flipped the script again. What was supposed to be a tense, controlled interview had turned into a live wire of truth bombs, crowd reactions, and undeniable shifts in power dynamics. In that moment, Mel wasn't just a guest on The View, he was the one holding court. And the audience? They weren't just watching, they were responding. The applause didn't fade quickly. It built, echoed, filled the studio. People weren't just clapping for Mel Gibson, the man. They were clapping for the conversation they've been waiting to hear, the one that dared to say out loud what so many had only whispered. And as the show cut to commercial, one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a turning point. As the debate intensified, the live audience transformed from polite observers to an energized crowd. It started gradually, a few murmurs, a couple of claps. But as Mel Gibson kept dropping truth bombs and holding his ground with cool, collected precision, the energy shifted completely. The viewers in the studio were no longer passive bystanders. They were fully invested. Every time Mel spoke, people leaned forward. Every time Whoopi tried to regain control, someone from the crowd shouted, "Let him speak," or "You're missing the point." And then came the moment that sent the entire room into overdrive. Whoopi, visibly frustrated, narrowed her eyes and said, "Well, you still made mistakes, Mel. That's not up for debate." She delivered it like a mic drop, confident, absolute, expecting silence. But Mel, he didn't even blink. "Of course I did. I'm human," he replied calmly. "But you know what's worse than a mistake, refusing to let someone grow from it." The room erupted. The applause wasn't polite anymore. It was thunderous, the kind of reaction that only comes when someone says what others are too afraid to say. There were gasps, cheers, and even standing ovations from parts of the audience. You could feel the shift. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a moment. Even people watching from home felt it. Within minutes, clips from the exchange started surfacing online. TikTok was flooded with edits of the back and forth, with creators stitching their reactions, often wide-eyed and stunned, mouthing "Mel snapped" or "he cooked" as they watched his replies. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like Maishin Mel vs Whoopi, The View Meltdown and Not Mel Gibson Uncensored began trending globally. YouTube exploded with reaction videos. Some were titled, "Mel Gibson silences Whoopi Goldberg on live TV. The View falls apart as Mel Gibson exposes the truth." Best TV moment of the year, Mel Gibson drops facts. Even media outlets couldn't ignore it. Headlines started, rolling out within the hour. Mel Gibson sparks viral storm. After explosive View appearance, mere variety. Whoopi versus Mel, the TV clash that has everyone talking. The Hollywood Reporter. Cancel culture is performance. Mel Gibson flips the script on The View. TMZ back in the studio. The mood was visibly shifting. Whoopi was still trying to keep her composure, but you could tell she hadn't expected this kind of blowback. Not from the audience, and certainly not from Mel Gibson, a man the media had long considered out of the Hollywood spotlight. Meanwhile, Mel remained calm, not smug, not arrogant, just solid. Like a man who had nothing left to prove, only the truth to speak. He continued, "You can cancel a person's career, but you can't cancel the truth. And the truth is, redemption has to mean something. If we say people can change, but never give them the space to do it, then we're just pretending to care." The audience clapped again, harder this time. Co-hosts Joy Behar and Sunny Hostin exchanged looks. Sarah Haynes awkwardly glanced at the floor. No one quite knew how to steer the conversation back. Mel had taken over, and the viewers loved it. The YouTube comments of every trending clip, people were chiming in, "This is the realest thing I've seen on TV in years. Mel Gibson just said what millions of people have been thinking. He's not excusing his past. He's owning. That's more than most do." Whoopi met her match. People weren't just reacting to Mel's words. They were resonating with the deeper message. Everyone knows someone who's made a mistake. But today's culture rarely allows for a comeback, no matter how sincere the apology or the effort, to grow. And that was the power of Mel's appearance. He humanized the fallout. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was demanding honesty from a system that so often acts as judge and jury, with no room for appeal. As the segment began to wind down, the audience was still buzzing. The show's producers clearly hadn't expected this kind of response. There were whispers behind the cameras. The live feed struggled to keep up with the reaction. When the hosts tried to move on to a lighter segment, the energy just wasn't there. The audience wasn't interested in fluff. They had just witnessed a moment of real, uncomfortable, powerful truth. And Mel Gibson? He walked off set with his head high. Not victorious in a fight, but validated in something much deeper. He had reclaimed his voice, and he reminded millions watching around the world that redemption doesn't start when the world forgives you. It starts when you stop hiding from your truth. By the end of the segment, Whoopi seemed rattled, while Mel walked off calmly, shaking hands with the other co-hosts. It was clear. This wasn't just a guest appearance. It was a cultural moment. On social media, opinions were divided but loud. Some called Mel's appearance a masterclass in redemption. Others argued that Whoopi was being ganged up on. But the majority praised the fact that someone finally challenged the View's one-sided conversations. Popular YouTubers and podcasters started weighing in. Clips from the episode were reposted with titles like, "Mel Gibson destroys Whoopi Goldberg live on TV. The View gets a wake-up call. Mel wasn't playing. Finally, a guest with a spine." Even Hollywood insiders began chiming in. Few actors, usually silent on controversial topics, retweeted clips with emojis. Mel's fan base surged. People who had once written him off were now re-evaluating his role in Hollywood. And as for Whoopi, she didn't address the exchange for days. But when she did, she admitted, "It got heated. But I respect anyone who comes on and stands their ground." If you found this video insightful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more real talk moments, and hit the bell icon so you're first to know when we drop the next story. Thanks for watching.